First of all, thank you for taking time to chat with me. Really enjoyed the film.
Oh, thanks.
I hope that you take this as a compliment because I very much mean it as a compliment. But I think that Violent Ends was like this very effective throwback that, in a way, feels like a modern version of the type of movie that would be like a hidden gem I would find on VHS.
Dude, that is so offensive. I can't believe you would say something like that. No, that's I mean, what a high mark. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I'm such a fan of those types of movies, and certainly when we set out to make this movie, that was part of the intent from the get-go.
Yeah, and what stands out to you about like this style and era of film that you're trying to evoke?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I was born in '82, so like I grew up in the '80s, and with parents who kind of came of age in that time. And so like I think my mom exposed me to those films. So they were just, it's like it's kind of I don't know, I feel like everybody when you get to the age that you're like in your formative years, you then realize those years that came before you that your parents came of age in actually played a huge role in who you are and in the world you grew up in. And I don't know, just the '70s was always such a magical kind of era to me. And I think once I discovered, there's a grittiness to the '70s. I think that
Yeah.
I've always been taken by, and that golden era sheen from the 1950s, was fully gone by the '70s. And you had the psychedelic thing in the '60s, which was cool, and I love a lot of '60s film, but there's just something also very like grounded about the '70s, right? You're away from the musical and westerns, and you're seeing real people with real problems. And yeah, I mean, whether it's like films like Death Wish, I think of that were hugely influential for this. You know, I don't know, French Connection, I think of. I mean, maybe that's a bit earlier, but Dog Day Afternoon. These are all like there's just a sweatiness to them, and there's I think growing up in Arkansas, that's something I could relate to.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned, you grew up in Arkansas, but I think this genre of films that you're referencing, like this, like the revenge genre, many of these films, including your film, are set in the American South. Why do you think that this setting is so like conducive to this genre?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's for many reasons, but I think most of which is probably cultural. I mean, we're a very obviously the South has a storied past, a checkered history that we're all very well aware of. But the thing about that is, and I think it's true of what my movie is trying to say too, is like that kind of sweatiness and violence and crime and you know family struggles, it gets passed on, and it's in the so like all the history of the South, like all the travails that we've had to go through, it's still in our DNA, and we're still wrestling with it today. And I certainly was aware of it growing up, and I think there's just something about the South and these smaller towns and these smaller communities in Middle America that is rife for family drama because the family unit is the core of you know culture there. And then when you mix that with, the genres we're talking about, I mean, like revenge is the most basic of carnal, kind of primal emotions in a way. And so it's so easy to transpose that emotion into family drama and generational violence, which is what our film is about. And I don't know, it's just kind of, there is certainly a lesser than feeling growing up in the South. When you grow up in the South, you feel you know, we're different. We have an accent, although obviously I don't have an accent, but I promise my mother and my whole family does. But we feel different and we feel slightly less than, and there's a grittiness to us and we're very polite to your face, but behind your back we're going to stab you kind of thing. And I think that's very true. Obviously, there's a lot of great people in the South. There's a lot of it's like anywhere. There's good and bad people, and that's what this movie is hopefully trying to get to is showing some sort of, you know, nuanced version of Southern Americans. And a lot of times you say, there's a lot of these stories that are often set in the South. That's true. I find a lot of times, and I don't know about you, but that a lot of the ways Southerners are portrayed in cinema they're cliches. They're the hillbillies
Yeah.
and the country bumpkins. And hopefully this film is, plays against that trope and shows you a more nuanced gradation of gray rather than black and white. But I don't know. There's a hotness, there's a heat to the South, there's a grittiness. It's just like it's a tough place where it feels like people have to make their own way in the world and figure out their own, their own way to carving out a life for themselves. And it's the last place in the country that still feels a little frontierish in a way. And obviously that helps when we're
Yeah.
speaking of the genre.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned how this film is about family. Like the whole film is like firmly centered on the relationships, obviously like the brother relationship, the cousin relationship, the romance. Why did you think that this emotional through line was so important to the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about revenge that's tough is obviously you're asking an audience to go on board with something that is should be morally antithetical to everything they believe in, right? But this is getting back to what I said. There's just something primal about revenge. It's like I don't think the vast majority, you and I, Sean, would probably not want to take revenge, but there's something cathartic about watching the person on screen who is willing to stand up and take matters into his own hands. Now, the challenge with that is obviously most of the times when we're talking revenge, the character who's taking revenge is yeah in a moral gray zone. So like I always knew from the get go I wanted to root the main character in family because it's so relatable. It's something we can all relate to and bring the audience in. And more so, I mean, I really do believe the spine of this movie is Alexandra Shipp's character is Emma, and she's it's a very dark movie. It's a dark world, but like there are pops of lightness, and the brightest light in the whole movie is Alexandra Shipp. And I knew I was like, okay, if we can get an audience to fall in love with them, then we kind of have the audience, by the neck, and we can kind of do whatever we want and take them along for the ride. And it's obviously there's a quote at the beginning of the movie that is Shakespearean. That's another huge influence for me. Is like I was a massive fan of Shakespeare growing up and was always drawn to the Hamlets and the Macbeths. Obviously, Macbeth is an easy reference here, but you know, I don't know. There's something about family and love that when you put those things at the heart of revenge, it's just something that we can all relate to and we can all, see ourselves in, or at least see us pressed upon the conflict of whether or not to take action or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've kind of touched upon this, but the revenge thriller is a genre that's been around for hundreds of years, even. Why do you think that it still resonates? Like you've kind of touched upon how it's like this core emotion, but beyond that, why do you think it still resonates?
I mean, I think it's, I don't know. I don't know how, I think revenge films play all over the world, but I think there's something decidedly American about taking matters into your own hands because we're a country that was founded on people who took matters into their own hands, who literally, floated across the ocean to start a new life. And speaking of frontiers, like we're frontier people. We are people who are self-reliant, and, willing to do things ourselves. I don't know. I just think there's something in our DNA as Americans that we are fascinated and drawn to the types of characters who I say often, like the things I'm drawn to as a filmmaker is I love telling stories about good people making bad decisions, but for the right reasons. And so there's that moral gray thing going on there. It's like, I also fundamentally, we are a puritanical, people. We came here as a religious entity. And I think there's something with good and evil baked into it that we're drawn to. It's like, it's very biblical in a way when you think about, I mean, Cain and Abel is basically the proto revenge story, right? In ways, but like Adam and Eve, it's just baked into our mythologies as Americans, and I think it's just in our DNA. And I don't know, like I remember seeing Braveheart and Gladiator and those movies that are very commercial, broad Hollywood revenge, but even those films, I remember just the feeling at the end where like you're watching Maximus like go into the belly of the beast in Rome in the Colosseum, and there's such an energy. And I don't know, it's like modern day superheroes. We don't have real superheroes, so the person who is willing to take action into their own hands feels like a grounded version of the superhero, and that's very American. I don't know. It's just who we are as people, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And to kind of shift topics,
Sure.
I think that one of the things that really impressed me most about the film was Billy Magnuson's performance,
Oh,
because
thanks.
we usually see him as either like the silly comedic relief or like entirely like dastardly, but we see a very different side of him here. So,
Yeah.
at what point did you kind of know he was right for this project?
Well, first of all, I love that you use the word dastardly. That's a word that we don't get enough. I love that word. Well, I had edited. I started out as an editor, and so I edited a small little independent film. I think around 2012 called The Brass Teapot, and Billy was in that movie. And so I had the fortune of getting to cut Billy and his performance and I saw in his dailies. I remember that was again what you said. He's known for comedic, foils, and he's really good at that. And in that movie, it was the same thing. He was kind of playing like an 80s frat boy kind of douchebag guy. And he was so funny. But I remember in the dailies thinking, this guy has so much more in his well that he's not even tapping into. And so when the opportunity arose, I mean, this is obviously many years ago, but when the opportunity arose and his name came up, I leapt at the opportunity. I love my favorite performances and my favorite casting choices are always the ones that feel unexpected and like I love there's here's the thing is like I came up as a comedy editor and I think the thing is with comedians there's a lot of comedians out there who on face value seem very funny, but when you dig deeper you see that their humor comes from a pretty, I don't want to say dark place, but just a place of real trauma and pain and their superpower is that they can make light of it and turn that into something else. And the thing is those comedians, it's not all of them, but the ones that can really tap into darkness and the dual side of comedy, they can go really deep with drama. And to me, they're some of the most interesting actors. I think Billy's amazing in this movie. I think it's one of the best performances. But I think of like actors like Allison Janney and like actors that are so funny or like even Leonardo DiCaprio. I saw him in the One Battle After Another. He's so funny. And like to be able
Yeah.
to to me, those are the most interesting performances. To be able to balance that like cliche, the happy face, frowny face kind of thing. That's where drama to me is the most interesting. And I think Billy, God, he showed up and he just nailed it. He really did. And he's from New York, but he grew up in Georgia building barns with his dad. And like I remember when I zoomed with him and met him, I was like, this is the guy. And he's transformed. I really do think like when people see Billy in this movie, they're probably not at first glance not going to recognize him. And I mean, he's such a star. He really is a leading man.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the other side of the cast, we have James Badgedale, who I think is like one of the most underrated actors working today. I've been a big fan of his since I think the first time I like actively noticed him was Standoff at Sparrow Creek.
Oh, so
And
good. Yeah,
yes,
it's
he's
such a
so
good
good
flick.
in that. He's so good in this. Could you kind of talk about working with him to bring this character to life?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I've been a big fan of Badge. Going back to The Departed, I think The Departed was the first movie I remember seeing him in, and thinking about him. He also has a small role in Flight. I don't know if you ever remember that scene. There's a scene
And
in the
which
hallway
film?
with it's Flight with Denzel
Oh,
Washington.
okay, yeah.
There's a hallway sequence in a hotel corridor that like Denzel, I think, is maybe the best American actor of the last 30, 40 years, and Badge is going toe to toe with Denzel in
Mhm.
that dancing. I mean, but yeah, I've been a massive fan of Badge. He's such a talented guy, and I think we made this movie during the actor strike. So I think we were very fortunate that people like Badge, who normally would be booked up a year and a half in advance, happened to be available. And when the opportunity came and our casting director said, "Whoa, what do you think about this?" I was like, "Get out of here! Like we can get James Badge Dale. My God!" And yeah, from day one, Badge is the best, dude. He's from New York. He grew up working construction. He comes from a blue collar background. I think he related a lot to the world, and he's such a collaborator, man. The first night he was on set. Little anecdote, but we were shooting the race car sequence, and in the movie there's a stock car sequence, and we were at that racetrack, and because of the way scheduling works, we had to shoot all the cars first, which meant that the acting, the real scene work, had to come later, which meant it was happening at 2, 3 in the morning because it was a night shoot. And so I was like, it was his first night. He didn't have much. I was like, let's shoot Badge out so he can go home and get some rest. I shot Badge out, and so we had leftover scene work with Alexander Shipp and Billy Magnuson and Nick Stahl. And I said, no, you're good. You can go home, Badge. He's like, no, no, I'm not going home. And I was like, you're good. We don't need you because the scene was him. It's a reverse. And he's like, you know what? I'll stay and I'll just stand off camera so they can see me, so they can play off me. And I was like, that's the kind of guy he is. It's like, we're a small independent movie. This guy's working with Scorsese and, you
Mhm.
know, and he doesn't have to do that, but that's the kind of guy he is. And yeah, I mean, his wardrobe, his haircut, that was all Badges. I mean, those were conversations Badge and I had together, but like he built this character, and I truly think he's turned in one of the more like recognizable and memorable like turns as the Man in Black in like a western that you've seen in quite a while.
Yeah, for sure. And Violent Ends, despite the title, doesn't have a ton of violence. It's like these short bursts of brutality. Why do you think that this approach was necessary for this film?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that because that was definitely the purpose. I mean, the original title of the movie was actually called The Killing Kind, but we had to abandon that for a host of reasons. The least of which was one of my friends actually adapted a novel during COVID in England called The Killing Kind. So we are like, all right, we got to change the title. And Violent Ends came to me simply because of the Shakespearean reference and how much rooted it was in kind of family and revenge and familial kind of cycles. But the movie, though it is called Violent Ends, is the violence in the movie to me had I wanted it to feel as grounded as possible. And
Mhm,
a movie that we hearken to a lot that I love is Jeremy Saulnier's Blue Ruin,
mhm,
which handles violence so viscerally. Now that movie is very different in the sense that Macon, Blair's character is much more ill-equipped, let's say, than Billy Magnuson's character in Violent Ends. But what that movie does so well is like when the violence comes, it's shocking. It's like obviously it's coming because it's a violent movie, but that's such a magic trick to me. Like if you have an audience going in expecting it's like a horror movie, the scares are coming.
mhm.
If you can figure out how to keep the audience guessing when the scares are going to come, you win. And so like for us, I always took the tact of I wanted the violence to feel like real violence. And to me, not that I've been around shooting people and stabbing people, because I haven't, but I've certainly been in heightened violent situations like fights and things. When people are getting in fights, and whenever you're in those moments, to me, it feels like they come out of nowhere. It feels scary and shocking, and then it's almost over as quickly as it started, and you're left with this strange, eerie calmness that's mixed with adrenaline, and it's just a euphoric kind of strange feeling. And so that was the approach with the violence, was like not letting the violence be gratuitous and exploitive, but feeling real. And also, like so much of this movie is about like the responsibility of taking violence in your hands. And like we wanted, most revenge films and a lot of revenge films, a lot of westerns that we were hearkening to, they kind of gloss over the violence, and the killing is, you know, part and parcel to the path of destruction that needs to get your character from point A to point B. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted the audience to know, like, okay, well, if you're going to take this gun in your hand and you're going to make that choice, you're going to have to live with the consequences, and the consequences should feel shocking and unnerving. But at the same time, it's not an exploitive film. It's not a film that's just wall to wall blood and gore. Although I love some of those movies, don't get me wrong. This is not that. We were much more trying to point the audience to hopefully they leave this movie and they think about the violence and they think about what it means and what the repercussions of those actions are.